Multitasking, we know, scrambles your brain, degrades your productivity, and makes you worse along every dimension, with the single exception that you have false confidence that you are being more productive. So don't multitask. However, what you can do is rapidly switch between hyper-focus on tasks.
I'm Junaid Ahmed, host of Hacks and Hobbies podcast and a digital presence advisor at HumbleZone. This episode is brought to you by Home Studio Mastery. I launched a consultation and course program to help podcasters and course creators to create a space in their homes that will reduce the friction of creating content and appearing their best when showing up on camera. The pandemic gave us a lot of issues, but this one is here to stay. We're now so much closer to our audience thanks to video becoming more popular and affordable. I help guide folks who want to create Hollywood-worthy studios to not only capture great content, but also build more confidence, more authority, and be more comfortable in front of the camera. If I can do it, you can too. And with my help, you can do it faster. So if you'd like to learn more, visit homestudiomastery.com and how you too can create a home studio that brings out your personality, professionalism, and possibilities. Thank you for tuning in to Hacks and Hobbies with your host, Junaid. We're visited by our amazing guests coming from all walks of life. Want to learn their story, their struggles, and their journey on how they got to where they are today. So stick around. Welcome to today's episode, where we have the pleasure of speaking with Stever Robbins, a productivity expert and serial entrepreneur. Stever has been part of the success story of multiple startups and has helped executives advance in their careers. With his extensive experience and expertise, he runs Get It Done groups, helping people make extreme progress in their important projects and habits. Let's dive into this incredible journey and learn from the best. Stay tuned. Stever, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dude, we were speaking in the green room on how people need reminders all the time. And you wrote a book on productivity a few years ago, but you've done a lot more than just write that book. So let's just get started and share with the audience, share with the one person listening to this episode.
Hi, one person.
Where you come from, who you are, how you got started.
You know, not
I just opened a can of bookworms or something.
Like most of your guests, I was raised in a traveling New Age, polyamorous hippie commune.
Okay.
Which I gradually came to understand that was not mainstream. I am one of the few people you've ever met who learned that it was not acceptable to wear a loincloth to public school by actually trying it. And they informed me that it was not acceptable to wear that. And I was just like, why not? We wear these at home, which was the wrong thing to say, because as soon as you say that, every neighborhood kid is instantly prohibited from being able to play with you. And you grow up lonely and with nothing to keep you company, except books. Because this was back before people stopped reading books and just started scrolling through TikTok. And spent a lot of my younger life as we traveled around the country. And believe me, when you're a kid, being in a traveling hippie commune, not nearly as interesting as doing it as an adult. So I wasn't really into all that weird stuff that the grown-ups were into. And I learned. I spent a lot of my time learning, reading books, pursuing things that were interesting to me. If you're into Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ, which basically means I'm a freaking geek. So I learned a lot of stuff about math and about science. And then, as happens, my mother got tired of being part of a hippie commune, and she's like, can't we just settle down a little bit and, maybe
let's try that for a little bit.
Exactly. And long story short, as my dad said no, my father kept going off and doing his trip. My mother settled in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I went to a normal school, was persecuted mercilessly by the kids because I was so weird. And I found my refuge in what you would now call the internet. At the time, it was called the ARPANET. And
ARPANET, that's right.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Oh, yes. I was there. I will not tell you the exact year, but it was a long time ago.
Yes.
And there was only one dial-up phone line. to access the ARPANET from Albuquerque. And me and my 8th grade nemesis, Marty, used to fight over it. Ironically, Marty went on to become the chief financial officer of Goldman Sachs. I did not. So you have to watch out for those 8th grade nemesis.
Okay.
Always a good idea to resolve your hostilities before you go on to 9th grade. But there was one phone line, and I would call up and I would use the MIT computers because this was so long ago, they didn't have passwords yet. So anyone who had access could just get onto the computer and use it. And I made a bunch of friends over the ARPANET. And when it was time for me to decide where to go to school, I wanted to go to MIT, which I didn't know was pronounced MIT. So, fortunately,
I want to go to MIT, ma'am.
Exactly. Fortunately, people were so distracted by my loincloth that nobody even noticed I was mispronouncing the name of the school. So long story short, I ended up going to MIT and majored in computer science, founded a company with a few friends called FTP Software. So we helped PCs in the 1980s get connected up to the internet if they wanted to be connected to the internet. Later, I did a number of things, found myself at a high-tech company that was going out of business, even though I thought they had the best product on the market. I asked my boss, why are we going out of business? And she said, to understand that, you must understand corporate strategy. And I was like, wow, that sounds pretty impressive. What do I read to understand corporate strategy? And she said, you do not read anything. You go back and you get an MBA.
Oh, the
I was
big
like,
3 letters.
oh, exactly. I'm like, I don't play basketball, so I'm not at all sure that why. And she's like, no, an MBA. So I said, no way in heck am I ever going to go back and get another degree. However, I did live a couple blocks away from Harvard Business School. So one day I just wandered down to sit in on a class. The classes looked like fun. Ended up going to Harvard Business School, right? Most people have much more career aspirations to go to HBS.
Yeah.
I literally went because I was curious about corporate strategy and I wanted to know how come having the best product would not win in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Which is something, by the way, that I think is absolutely true up until, even now. It's quality, I think, is almost irrelevant to marketplace success. So went to HBS. From there, went to a little company called Intuit in Silicon Valley, where I was the project manager of the Quicken Visa card, which was the first online downloadable consumer financial statement ever. So every time you download your bank statement now, I want you to think that you met the guy who project managed the very first one of those ever.
Nice.
Right. And by the way, that and $7 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So from Intuit, I did a number of startups. At one point, I went back to Harvard Business School to help them redesign the curriculum. That got me really interested in how do you teach people things? And in particular, how do you develop people who are powerful general managers? That's what Harvard Business School teaches is general management is how to be, I won't say it doesn't necessarily have to be the top person, the very top person in a company, but how to be the person who is in charge of a division or a business unit who has to take all the different areas of the company into account. So interestingly, a CEO is a general manager and so is a solo practitioner. Because if you're in business for yourself, you need all of those same pieces.
Do you need those capabilities and skill set?
Yeah. If somebody comes to you and says, are you profitable? You need to know what profitable means, which, by the way, most self-employed people, as far as I can tell, don't know what profitable means.
What is profitable again?
Exactly. Is that before or after I pay myself a salary? And I'm like, well, since the reason you're in business for yourself is to make money, you probably should know whether or not profit is before or after you pay yourself a salary. So anyway, since then, I've hopped in and out of a number of different startups. In between startups, I often work as an executive coach. Did a stint in the finance industry. Helped with a strategy redesign initiative at Babson College, the #1 school for entrepreneurship in the world. And I kind of do all the things. Got very interested in musical theater about 12 years ago. And when my book was coming out, I started a podcast in 2007 called The Get It Done Guys, Quick and Dirty Tips to Work Less and Do More. And it was personal productivity tips.
Nice.
It hit #1 on iTunes. I mean, #1 overall on iTunes. Actually, it was #2. It was #2 overall, but I'll say #1 because I'm the only one who has the screenshots.
Exactly.
So no one can disprove me. But it hit #2 on iTunes overall, and it stayed in the top 10 business category for, at least 7 or 8 years, and then still stayed in the top 100, maybe even the top 10. Honestly, you stop tracking it after a while.
Right, exactly.
And I stepped down from that in 2020. But when I wrote my book, and the book was based on the podcast, I had just discovered musical theater, and I was joking with a friend of mine, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm suddenly into musical theater, and I have to go promote this book on how to label your file folders." And I really wish I had like a one-man musical that I could perform to promote the book. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you know what I do for a living, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, you're a journalist." Because I thought he was a journalist. Wrong. He was a musical theater writer and composer.
Look at that.
And he composed for Off-Broadway. So the two of us collaborated on a musical called Work Less and Do More, the zombie musical, which is the only musical that's so dramatic that people cry, and the only musical so informative that people take notes. And it's wonderful. No matter whether you're there for information or whether you're there for the drama, you will love the show. I actually took voice lessons and performed it. I performed it a couple times. You can see a clip, not me performing, but a professional musical theater actor performing it at worklessanddomore.com. You can see a little 5-minute promotional clip. So I got the musical theater geek stuff going on. Is that enough to get us started?
I think we need to start. Take a pause, man. You've done so. Like, hold on.
You said get started. So you didn't say get finished.
I know. I realized my mistake. Stever, I'm just still stuck on people are taking notes while crying, watching your musical. So how do they even know what they took?
Okay. Well, you just identified the key piece of the development of musical. Is when we did one of the readings of it, half of the audience said, "I was so busy taking notes that I didn't even realize there was a real story here until halfway through. Now I want to see it again so that I can pay attention to the story."
There you go.
The other half of the audience said the opposite. They said, "I was so engrossed in the story that I suddenly realized I should have been taking notes." So our solution when we actually performed it was to give people a printed handout that had all of the productivity tips on it. And we said, "Look, enjoy the show and you don't have to take notes. We'll give you the handout because it's a lot harder to take the dramatic part home than it is to take the page of handouts home." So that was how we resolved it. Wow. People were not, in fact, able to take notes while they were engrossed in the story because the story was too engrossing.
The story's too amazing. Wow, man, I love that. So you got a musical, you wrote a book, you had a podcast for, 12 plus years.
577 episodes, plus an audiobook, plus several specialty episodes that we did for United Airlines that were just for United. So those didn't appear in the main podcast stream.
Dude, that's awesome. I love that journey. And it all started because you were trying to find your own people and you find it on the internet. And that's true for a lot of people right now, too. There's so many different communities. There's so many different ways that we can expand our minds and find our people because we are too weird.
Yes. Well, that has pros and cons.
Yes, of course.
As somebody who has watched literally, I'm not going to give a number because I'll get too depressed. Let's just say that I have watched internet communication from the time before we had screens, from the time it was entirely text on printing terminals, all the way up through the evolution of, video and images and so on and so forth. And there's very much a double or quadruple-edged sword. On one hand, we can find the people who are our tribe and who are our community. And I think that has brought unbelievable value to the world. It's allowed marginalized communities to be able to find each other. It's allowed people who have strange and unusual hobbies to connect with other people who have them and be able to take the state of the art, the state of their craftsmanship, way beyond anything they could have done without having a community. And then there's the shadow side of that, which the shadow side is, it's that a lot of people now have not taken the effort to learn how to integrate with mainstream culture. Right. I mean, when I make my jokes about wearing a loincloth to school, I'm serious. But because I couldn't stay behind a screen, because I actually had to engage with the world in person, because I was, I was the only one behind a screen in my entire city. So, it's not like I could run my whole social life this way in all my relationships. I had to learn to be able to bridge that. So I had to learn the social skills to be in person, to create in-person relationships, etc., while at the same time, I had this great ability to find community. So one of the dark sides is it makes it too easy for us to not learn hard things about living
Yeah.
in community. That's one piece. And then the other piece, of course, is even as it allows marginalized groups like, the loincloth wearing internet geeks to find each other, it also allows people who are very destructive to find each other. It allows
Hmm.
people who have problems
Yes.
to find other people with those same problems. And instead of forming support communities, they can form communities that are essentially all about bonding and commiserating and reinforcing, oh, poor us, we're victims of
Mm.
XYZ, or
Wow.
we're outraged, and so we're going to have a violent whatever, we're going to go attack someone, we're going to cyberbully someone. So at the same time as it has enabled unprecedented ability of communities to connect across the world, it has also, and it's enabled that for the communities that are destructive as well as the communities that are constructive. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things we need to learn to grapple with as a society.
You're absolutely right. It brings out the human nature, the dark and the bright side. No matter which technology might be the vessel of connecting the people and just making it much easier to find those people, as opposed to back in the days, you would have to go into those dark alleys to find your people, essentially. Really
Yeah.
interesting. What in all of this kept you motivated in coming back to discovering more of what was around you? Or
Well, I
yeah.
mean, one is I was just born with insatiable curiosity, and I just love learning things, primarily about people. I love people. They're my species. If you've ever seen the 1970s movie Harold and Maude, that is a line from that movie, and I love it. So also, I was very single-minded, and
Mm.
I would say my number one motivator is achieving things. If you've ever done the Clifton Strengths Finder, my number one strength is achievement.
Interesting,
And
because mine is as well.
there you have it. And
We're,
look,
we're
and,
both
and we're both in the
achievers.
same place. Yes. And we have come together.
Yes, we have.
Well, in order to keep achieving stuff, you have to have stuff to achieve. And I figured out, I don't know how the heck I figured this out, because it's a
Hmm.
very advanced thought for an 11-year-old. But when I was about 11, I figured out, like, oh, if I put a whole bunch of effort into learning how to learn things efficiently, then I will be able to acquire skills faster and faster than I
Mm.
otherwise could have, which will then enable me to achieve more and to be able to complete more things, etc. So all through, I would say, my teens and a lot of my 20s, I spent a lot of time learning to learn and
Mm.
practicing different states of mind and different approaches to things. Self-hypnosis, for example, is one of my skills. And I was like, how can I put these together? And for me, the purpose was to learn stuff.
To learn more stuff, yeah.
Right. And so that's been one of the biggest motivators. And it's again, it's kind of weird how these things snowball,
Hmm.
because actually it was after college. It was a couple of years after college. It took me a very long time to understand how unusual my upbringing was. Right. I mean, I joke about it now, but I mean, literally until my mid-20s, I had
Hmm.
never met somebody who wasn't a math, science, computer geek. I went to a
Wow.
math, science, computer high school. I went to a math, science, computer college. I went into high tech, which was a math, science, computer industry. I literally thought that we were representative of the population at large.
Yeah.
And then I went to Harvard Business School and I discovered, oh yeah, like 0.1% of people are geeks, and the other
Yeah.
99.9% look at us and go, really? Really?
You're the normal
You know,
person.
and
Hmm.
so when I figured this out, when I realized that I was in the minority, then my learning project essentially became to learn how people thought and to learn how they communicated and to learn how I would have to package ideas, because I thought differently from other people. So I'm like, how
Yeah.
do I package my thinking in ways that other people can understand it and relate to it and connect to it? And I probably spent another 10 years really, like, very consciously doing things like trying to break my ideas down in different ways and explain them
Mm.
to people, figuring out how to teach people things. The stint that I did at Harvard Business School, where we did the curriculum redesign,
Yeah.
one of the things that I simply just declared was part of my job was to learn everything the human race knew about adult learning theory. Now, I definitely wanted to do this so that I could develop an awesome, amazing curriculum.
Hmm.
Absolutely. However, it was not lost on me that I was also going to walk away from that job with a deep understanding of how people learned stuff, or at least what we knew about it back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that has continued to be a big interest of mine. And as I've gone through my career, at this point, for example, I have several mentees who are all, like, I would say somewhere between the ages of 25 and 40.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentor them in everything from like this week, I taught one gentleman how to conceptualize certain computer science concepts that none of the classes he's take were really able to put into terms that he could understand. But I
Yeah.
can translate because I started thinking that way, and then I learned how to think the way,
The backward. Yeah.
everyone else thinks. And then I work with somebody else to prepare for a negotiation, right? So with one person, I'm teaching someone who did not grow up as an analytical thinker how to decompose problems the way you need to do it to be able to write a computer program. And then I'm going into my next meeting where I'm taking somebody and teaching them a purely people skill that requires understanding of communication and understanding of voice tone and understanding of, the kinds of questions you ask and how that moves people mentally and stuff. And I love it. I mean, it just, to me, what is there to keep you going except learning new stuff?
Absolutely. So, you're absolutely right. The growth mindset, the learning mindset is absolutely what the human nature is, because every day there's 1,400 new brain cells born. If you don't put them anywhere, they go to die. And
give them to me. I could use them.
We could send them to you. They even did a study where they compared a taxi driver from London who had been driving taxi for 10 years with somebody who had just started or only done it for 3 years. And you could see the navigation section of your brain and how much more it was developed. Because in London, you cannot be a licensed taxi driver unless you know all of the roads in London.
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know. I don't remember. There's a name for it, isn't it? Like,
there's probably a name for it.
I want to say like the craft or something, but yeah, it's amazing. And people complain about having to learn their vocabulary words. I'm like, you know what? You should be lucky that you're only trying to memorize onomatopoeia and cromulent. You could be a taxi driver in London.
Exactly.
And
yeah, man, I love that. So we got through most of your journey. I mean, I don't know what year we're in.
We got through certain slices of my journey, believe me.
Right, exactly. We got the little sliver of taste of what you've done and where you come from and what kept you going, what kept you motivated, keep coming back. That achiever quality is really powerful. I really need to dig more into that because I've signed up for courses for speed reading because, hey, if I could speed read, I could read more books. But first I got to go read the speed reading book.
Yes. Well, now, by the way, I'm going to just take a little detour here for everybody listening and watching, right? What you just said was actually quite profound. I have a lot of people ask me things like, what's the one productivity hack that I should learn? And I'm like, if you spend your time on computers most of the time, if you're looking at screens, there are 2 skills that if you just improve, you don't have to double your speed. If you can improve your reading speed by 10% and your typing speed by 10%, if your job mainly involves sitting in front of a computer, reading and typing, you just optimized everything in your work life with that one skill acquisition. So, to people who heard that comment and just went like, oh, speed reading, I don't need speed reading. Like, what am I going to, I don't ever read books. It's not just books. So, think about that seriously because that's one of those skills that's pervasive.
No, it's really, really powerful because that course then led me to this podcast who was talking about power reading and power learning. And it was just really fascinating how there's so many people that are learning at like really fast speeds. And somebody told me that he took the speed reading and he's like, what you do is you just quickly skim through the pages and then come back and then look at it again and basically write down notes. So it's really, really neat what they told me. But I have definitely been writing a lot faster or reading a lot faster over the years because thanks to the podcasting, using my voice as a vessel to create content. And we talk anywhere from 200 to 300 words per minute as opposed to writing at a max of 120 to 160 words per minute.
Yep. It was true. And also, if you're going to be doing things like podcasting, etc., it's worth putting in the time at the beginning to to learn the keys, the pieces you need to learn, and then you can coast once you've got a certain skill level. But I still remember, I had a business mentor when I started my podcast, and I gave him the first couple episodes. I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Wow, you sound really stilted, like you're reading off a script. This sounds horrible." And I went home and I burst into tears, because even though I may be a gigantically manly man brimming with testosterone and muscles, I am a sensitive, delicate soul on the inside.
Exactly.
I was raised by hippies. And finished crying. I was like, okay, now I need to get good at this. So I went out and took a voiceover class, and I started doing things like reading off a script, but into my recorder, into a handheld recorder, then playing it back to hear what do I need to do to my voice tone to be able to make things interesting to listen to. One of the things I'm still not entirely sure of is so I think I read pretty engagingly at this point. I'm at 577 episodes, I was the second most popular thing on the channel, so I can't be doing too badly. What I still am not totally sure of is when I'm reading a script, even if I read it and it sounds very natural, it still doesn't sound as natural as just daily conversation.
Right.
When you're reading a script, even if you're doing it very, very well, there's just something different about the cadence of words that are on a script versus the cadence, etc. And I've contrasted that with actors. And if you watch acting from, say, the 1950s and 60s, actors in those films did not deliver their lines in a way that was natural. Like, you would never believe, oh, I'm actually watching two people, whatever. Yeah. But if you contrast that with modern films, and you watch a modern films, people deliver their lines in a very natural way, like in a way that I'm actually a fly on the wall watching real Spider-Man talk to real Mary Jane. So if you're going to learn to do that, you need to learn to make those kinds of distinctions, decide which of those ways do you want to be able to deliver things. Now, I've also taken acting lessons because I performed the musical. So I know about both of those ways, and I'm better at one than the other. But it's, I don't remember how we got on this. You have to interrupt me. Otherwise I'll talk forever.
It's all around being able to deliver the content, being able to convey the message, not just read it, but to learn. Speed reading or fast reading or fast listening, all of that requires you to experience. And like you said, you shared your episodes with somebody and they're like, oh, these sound like horrible, like you're reading. And I catch myself whenever I'm recording the intros to my guests, I'm reading it off of the text that they sent me. And anytime I ad-lib stuff, I start noticing I have a lot more pauses when I'm ad-libbing as opposed to when I'm reading off. So I was like, how can I sound like I'm ad-libbing the whole thing? So it's been a fun experiment.
Yeah, so one of the things that I did when I was learning to read a script is I would take a piece of writing. Let me see, I don't have anything here to demonstrate with. I would take a piece of writing and I would just read it out loud the way that I would read it if I were reading a script. And then I would ask myself, what did you say? Could you repeat that? But this time I had to just say it in my own words.
Yeah.
And when I said it in my own words, I would listen to the cadence and the pauses, where I sped up, where I slowed down. And then I would go back to the original piece of writing and I would try to duplicate those same cadences, only this time with the original words. And, I don't know if that's an official acting technique, but, that is a way where you start to learn, like, oh, when I'm ad-libbing, I go, I say things like, oh, whereas when I'm reading off a script, there's nothing in there that says, oh, no. Right. I don't.
And we're also double clutching when we're ad-libbing, because you're going to repeat the same thing. You're going to repeat the same thing when you say that when you're talking as a natural language, as opposed to when you're reading stuff.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Yes, we've gone through a lot of different dimensions, and we're all coming back to it all takes practice. You just got to get started. So hold on to your horses. We'll be right back. I'm Junaid Ahmed, host of Hacks and Hobbies podcast and a digital presence advisor at HumbleZone. This episode is brought to you by Home Studio Mastery. I launched a consultation and course program to help podcasters and course creators to create a space in their homes that'll reduce the friction of creating content and appearing their best when showing up on camera. The pandemic gave us a lot of issues, but this one is here to stay. We're now so much closer to our audience thanks to video becoming more popular and affordable. I help guide folks who want to create Hollywood-worthy studios to not only capture great content, but also build more confidence, more authority, and be more comfortable in front of the camera. If I can do it, you can too. And with my help, you can do it faster. So if you'd like to learn more, visit homestudiomastery.com and how you too can create a home studio that brings out your personality, professionalism, and possibilities. Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for holding on to the horses. We are back. You can let go. And we've been talking with Stever Robbins, really amazing human being. He's written several books. I'm not going to say what he's working on right now, but it's going to be really amazing when it does come out.
Don't say it.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're not saying it. We're not saying it. Okay, backtrack. Stever, you got some really amazing hacks to share with us. I know you've shared a few as we were having the conversation about your origin story, about the motivations, about how to be a good reader and how you can be 10% faster at doing everything if you just did one little thing. But I know you've got some more tips for the audience.
Absolutely. Okay. First of all, I will say the ultimate productivity tip, and if you've covered this before, tell me and I'll choose something else, but is to know why you're doing what you're doing. There's a way that human brains work, which is we decide we have some goal. We say, you know what? I want to go from Chicago to San Francisco, and I'm going to go ahead and just head over there. And you start going west, and then you come to the Rocky Mountains, and you're like, you know what? I want to go over this one particular pass that I think is going to be absolutely gorgeous. And you start to head towards that pass, and you discover it's a little bit too steep. So then you're like, maybe I should get a four-wheel drive car. You go and you get a four-wheel drive car and you try to go over that pass and you discover you bought a four-wheel drive car that's too wide. So you're like, man, okay, now maybe I should get a narrow one. And you go back and you get a narrow one. And it turns out the narrow one has a smaller gas tank because it's narrow and it doesn't have enough gas to get you through the pass. And you basically get super frustrated and you're just flailing for how to get through this pass. And you're trying to solve the problem of how to get through the pass, which is a different problem from how to get over the Rockies. Because maybe there's another pass just 5 or 6 miles away that all of your cars could have gone through. And human beings, we decide how we're going to get someplace. Then we forget the goal we're trying to achieve, and we get attached to the path that we've chosen to get there. That would be great if we always somehow magically chose the best, easiest, fastest path that actually works. The problem is we're really, really bad at choosing those paths. So we do things like, one of my favorites, and I'm actually putting together a class for people in their 20s and 30s, which is literally going to be how to prepare yourself for life, because there's a lot of stuff no one teaches us, and there's a lot of stuff that people teach us wrong. And one of the things, and it's wonderful, you can browse different places on Reddit and find entire Reddits devoted to slamming boomers, because boomers are so unbelievably out of touch with how to succeed in the world, because basically the ways that they had of succeeding don't work anymore. Because they grew up, if you were growing up in the 1950s and 60s, they would work for you. So it's not that the techniques didn't work, it's that they don't transfer because the world has changed. And what happens is that people come up with a way of doing things. And so one of the ways they do that is by going to other people and saying, so Bill Gates, tell me how to succeed. And Bill Gates says, all you have to do is work hard, and that ignores a number of things. Like Bill Gates founded Microsoft in a world that didn't already have Microsoft. If you were trying to do the same thing that he did, Microsoft itself would basically come up with a giant mallet and pound you into a bloody pulp.
Yes, they will.
So that same technique won't work. One of the other things that people under 40 may not know is Bill Gates also engaged in all kinds of anti-competitive practices, restraint of trade, fraud, all kinds of wonderful stuff, which he was found guilty of. And then he founded his foundation. And oh my gosh, now the only thing anyone thinks about him is that he is a philanthropist who puts microchips in people so that he can track them. Okay, so he's not perfect. But basically, the idea is that when you look for role models, first of all, you need to know what it is you're actually trying to achieve. Then you need to be very discerning about what advice you take. And you need to look at the person who you're modeling yourself after, or the person whose journey you're modeling yourself after, and really think, given where they started, given who they are, is that journey going to work for me? I read an entrepreneurship book that was a wonderful, wonderful entrepreneurship book. And I know the author. And he said things in the book like, just go out and raise $100 million to fund your company. And I was talking with him and I said, you do understand that advice is not really universally applicable. Number one, some businesses don't need $100 million, but more to the point, if you take a look at the people who successfully raise $100 million, you will notice something white and male, that there is a pattern as to who can raise money that has nothing to do with the quality of the business plan, nothing to do with the quality of the people's experience. And so if somebody who is a Black woman reads that book and applies his techniques, now hopefully we are heading into a world where she will be able to succeed.
Yeah.
But this book that is considered a Bible for how to do startups, it's only a Bible that applies to a certain segment of the population.
To a certain segment, yeah.
Right. So tip number one is keep your end goal in mind and really remind yourself and then test what you're doing against that. If my end goal is to get to California and I'm driving south on a road, I need to ask, is there a reason I'm driving south? Maybe I'm going around an obstacle. Maybe it makes sense for me to be driving south. But if I'm driving south, but I just kind of like driving south, well, you can keep driving south because you like it, but it's not going to land you in California. It's going to land you in the Gulf of Mexico. Right. That's obviously a geographic metaphor, but this is super common, is that people are still doing things today to try to reach a goal when if they were to stop and set that goal for the first time, they would realize that the way they've been trying just isn't going to succeed for them. Right. And I'll use myself as an example here because it's easier to talk about me than just to talk about other people.
Yeah.
I was fed the line back in the early 2000s that all you have to do to make $1 million on the internet is start a newsletter and send it out, and you give away free content and you'll magically become a millionaire. I gave away a lot of free content. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of words of free content, and it somehow didn't make me a millionaire. Well, yeah, there's this other missing piece, which is that you've got to have something to sell people.
You got to have something to sell.
Right.
Exactly.
And you have to understand what a business model is, so that whenever you're selling people something, you sell them things that can add up to $1 million. If you're selling a $1 ebook and you expect to become a millionaire from this $1 ebook, you've by definition got to sell over 1 million of the ebooks just to pull in $1 million. And that's before taxes. And that's assuming that the selling process itself doesn't cost you anything. So, so I guess what I'm saying, if I had to winnow it down, know where you're going. And if you are following the advice of experts, be critical. And I don't mean critical as in nasty. I mean critical as in like think hard about which parts of their advice transfer, which ones don't, and be thoughtful, because maybe they can help you, but just not with the pieces that work for them that aren't going to work for you. Right. The guy who wrote the book on entrepreneurship, there's a ton of advice in that book that would apply to my hypothetical Black woman. It's just that a Black woman reading that would need to be smart enough and savvy enough to be able to pull out the pieces that are really worth, taking home versus which ones aren't.
Yep.
So that's
tip number one. Yes.
Very old tip. I think that it's begin with the end in mind. Stephen Covey said it. I think that, what's his name? Who was the guy? How to Win Friends and Influence? Dale Carnegie. I think Dale Carnegie said it. Yeah, everyone says it. Begin with the end in mind. Another one is that remember there's competition. The one thing that we know in the world is our own actions and our own intentions, which means that if we are getting a particular result or not getting a particular result, we tend to ascribe it to our own actions because that's what we know.
That's all. Yeah.
right, we say, I'm doing this thing. Let me talk specifically about job hunting, for example. So I've counseled gazillions of people in doing job hunts because in college I worked as a resume editor, and somehow the skill set just, people kept coming to me and kept coming to me. And so I've seen lots and lots of people go through a job hunt. And one of the most common mistakes that people make is they look at their resume and they're like, oh, I want my resume to be perfect. And I send it in and I didn't get the job. I must suck. And what they're forgetting is you're not the only one who sent in a resume. 100 other people sent in a resume. What you're not doing is trying to show that you're adequate for the job. Mm-hmm. What you're trying to do is show that you are better than everyone else for the job. And that's actually a fairly different task. I was helping a woman once who wanted to get into finance, and we were talking, and she said, I asked her, I said, what is your investing strategy? She wanted to be a money manager. And she said, oh, I don't know. I figured I'd learn that on the job. Now, she was a smart person and she had a degree from prestigious school. So, in fact, she probably could learn it on the job. However, the person coming into that interview room right before her is going to sit down with the interviewer and say, here's my investing strategy. It's a modified combination of value investing and technical analysis. And at this point, they will pull out a stack of papers and spread them out on the desk. Let me show you the results of my paper portfolio evaluated over a neutral series of different 3-month intervals from 1995 all the way up to 2020. And whether or not she is actually more qualified for the job, it's the person with the paper portfolio that's going to get the attention, because they appear to have already been succeeding at the job. And so as you go throughout life, when you are trying to decide what to do next, what did you do wrong, what did you do right, remember that there are other elements of the system that you may or may not even be aware of that might be factoring into what's going on. And America in particular, and I don't know how many different countries people are going to be listening to this, but certainly in America, we have the great man myth or the great woman myth, which is that the results we get are a product almost solely of our own efforts and our own brilliance and our own ability to implement.
Yeah.
But no, not necessarily. Would Elon Musk be Elon Musk if his father hadn't owned an emerald mine?
Mm-mm.
Or what if instead of being born when he was born 10 years later and missed the window where tech companies with with very small initial capitalization could blow up to be gigantic? Because PayPal was where he really made the money that he used to seed the other things.
Yeah.
Everything is about context combined with individual resourcefulness. It's
absolutely.
And I don't believe there's any way to separate. Well, sorry, not to separate. I believe that if you ignore one or the other, you are always creating a really faulty conception of how the world works, because you need to understand both.
You need to understand both. I love it. So tip 1, know the end in mind. Tip number 2, know that there's always competition.
Yeah. Tip number one, know the end in mind and choose your experts wisely how to get to the end. Number 2, there's always competition. Yes. No, I'm supposed to come up with number 3.
Yeah, number 3, man. Come on.
Oh, wow. Number 3. Okay. Don't multitask, but do speed date your tasks. I would love to take credit for this. I do not deserve credit for this. I read this in a book by a man named Mark Forster, who I believe is the single most prolific creator of personal productivity systems on the face of the planet. Fortunately, he's getting up there in years. So, hopefully there'll be a year or two, where I am the foremost personal productivity expert.
We can get you there, especially with the hush new stuff you're working on.
Yeah, which is not about personal productivity. But so this comes from Mark Forster and his book, Get Everything Done and Still Have Time to Play. Multitasking, we know, scrambles your brain, degrades your productivity, and makes you worse along every dimension, with the single exception that you have false confidence that you are being more productive. So don't multitask.
Agreed. No multitasking.
However, what you can do is rapidly switch between hyper-focus on tasks. So here's what speed dating your tasks is. And this is one of my favorite things to do when I remember to do it. And I don't always remember to do it. Is you take a piece of paper, and those people who are watching on video can see the piece of paper. I'm holding it up. And you basically just have a bunch of lines and do this on paper. This is not an electronic exercise. and write down the top 5 things that you want to work on and make progress on 5 lines of the paper. And then right to the right of those 5 lines, you want to draw a few narrow columns, and you want to label 1:5, 1:10, and 1:15. Now, get out a timer, set it for 5 minutes, and immediately start working on the first item in the list. As soon as the timer goes off, put a check mark in the 5 column and go immediately to the next task. Do not reach a break point. Just keep going. Or not keep going, but switch tasks.
Keep
even though
switching
you're in the middle
and
of it.
working
Right.
through the timer.
So you do 5 tasks of 5 minutes apiece, then you take a 5-minute break. That takes half an hour. Do that again. Now you've taken a full hour. Next cycle through, start with 10 minutes per task and do 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, which will get you 10 minutes, which will get you through 50 minutes, and then take a 10-minute break. So you've now taken a total of 2 hours. At this point, you can either keep with the 10-minute cycles or you can go up to 15 minutes. And I don't know why, but even though trying to do things at the same time scrambles your brain, if you cycle through them and hyper-focus in these well-defined chunks, and your brain knows that you're gonna switch in 5 minutes, it's like if you're working on tasks A, B, C, D, E, and you're working on task A, if your brain is not even going to try to think about B, C, D, or E because it knows you're going to get to those. So
Right.
unlike normal, kind of switching tasks where you're like, oh man, I'm working on this, but I really should be working on that. Your brain knows you'll get there. So it really lets you hyper-focus. And as soon as the buzzer goes on, you go to the next thing, and now you're working on task B. And again, your brain will let you hyper-focus because it knows you're going to get back to task A, and it knows you're going to get to C, D, and E, etc. It's really interesting. And
I love that, Stever, because this is something very similar. Thank you for giving a name to it because I didn't have a name for it. But this is something that I've been doing for the past few weeks where I'll have a couple of tasks to work on. I'll work on one thing. I'm like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to go take a break. I'm going to go use the restroom, go eat, come back, and then I'm going to work on the next thing. So I think this is really an amazing way to get really super productive as well.
Now, note well a difference between what I just described and what you described. Is you're going until you reach a break point.
Right.
I am specifically not going
Not doing
to
the
a break point. And the reason being, your brain wants to complete things. So if you stop in the middle of something, when you come back to it on the next cycle, you'll be able to pick it right back up because your brain will basically be like, okay, been waiting for the last 25 minutes to get back to this task. I was in the middle of this sentence. What was right? I know what I want to say, and then boom, you're back. You're back in the saddle or in the whatever it is that you're doing.
I love it, man. Shoot, this is mind blowing.
Speed date your tasks.
Speed date your tasks. Thank you, man. Wow, that's some powerful tips, guys. Make sure you rewind and take notes because that was amazing. Thank you, Stever. All right, we're going to jump into our quick questions that I like to ask my guests. Now, Stever has had a lot of experience in a lot of different ways, and he's been in a traveling hippie along with his family for a long time. So
hippie, new age, polyamorous commune.
Look at that. There's so many adjectives and
I need to come up with an acronym for it. Yeah, it doesn't spell anything. I'll have to play with the word order.
All right. So, number one question: what is the one hobby that you wish you got into?
Oh, that I haven't, but that I wish that I did?
Yes.
I'll give 2. One is rock climbing. I have tried to go rock climbing, and at least given my current age and physical condition, I have never had I've never wanted to do it badly enough, given how expensive it is to take the time it would take to build up the upper body strength. But if I had started when I was 20, it would have been easy. So that's one. The other one, I am a huge Burning Man fanatic.
Okay.
And I've been 4 times. I want to go again, hopefully next year. And it has inspired me. I would love to learn something like metal welding.
Metal welding.
Do art on a really like do something that is physically creative. My entire career has been spent doing stuff that's mental. And I think a hobby that gave me a physical outlet, but a sophisticated one that I could start small and like build up to doing really amazing creative things. I wish that I had adopted such a hobby. I may still, but welding, you kind of need special equipment and you need an actual welding lab. And
I think the closest that you can come to creating something physical would be 3D printing because it requires knowing the computer and the software, and then being able to actually build something. In 2013, 2014, we actually backed some Kickstarter projects so we can get 3D printers.
Mhm.
And I wanted to do that because I wanted to build myself an Iron Man suit. But that never happened. But I did
Were they
build a
golden?
helmet out of foam.
Okay,
Yeah,
close.
very close. But there are a ton of people on TikTok and Instagram that have built entire suits of, Iron Man with things popping up and, folding. It's pretty neat just to watch
Have you
them.
ever heard of the 3D doodler?
I have one of those.
You do. Well, it was invented by a friend of mine. A friend of mine
Nice.
named Pete was he funded it with a Kickstarter, and
Yeah, I was one of the backers in the beginning.
there we have it. So it's
So you need to
another
connect me
first.
with him. There you go.
It actually, there's a chance I may be seeing him tomorrow.
Nice.
You never know.
Mention to him, hey, I met one of your backers from Kickstarter.
Exactly.
I have backed over 300 Kickstarter projects over the past 7-8 years.
Nice.
So it's been pretty amazing. I love supporting other people.
I know who I'm going to for my next project.
There you go. Nice.
So that was one question. What else?
What next question? What did you want to be when you were a child?
A grown-up?
A grown-up.
Which, let me tell you,
You're still working on it?
boy, but yeah, well, A, I'm still working on it, and B, boy, was that a bad decision. I did not know how to make good decisions as a kid.
You're not alone in that, by the way. Even grown-ups are still bad at making good decisions.
Oh, gosh, yes. Let me tell you, for anyone who's listening to this who's under the age of 25, one of the things they tell you as you're growing up, they tell you that adults are mature and adults make good decisions and adults listen to each other. And none of that is true. Adults are just larger versions of kids, and they're a little bit more subtle. So sometimes, instead of actually yelling and screaming and kicking their feet on the ground, they will instead look at you with the stare, and they will say, "Give me what I want." And it's exactly the same energy. Oh, yeah. Anyway, yes, no, it's a lot of adults never grew up in bad ways. And then some of them grew up and they never retained enough of their childhood in good ways.
Yeah. That's the other spectrum of people. I was trying to remember the word spectrum.
So for people who are only, looking here at the images you currently see on the screen, those blurry depth of field bookcases behind you, those have action figurines on them and stuff. I saw when you got up, got up to go to the bathroom, your camera focused in on that, and I was like, the truth comes out.
Yes, I'm still a child.
Probably, the closest I can really remember is probably an astronaut, because I think I grew up in the 70s, and we were still very psyched about the space program and about stuff like that. And I in retrospect, now that I know a lot more about astronauting, no, my God, no, just like that is
not a word.
No, yeah, and that's not the profession for me by any stretch of the imagination. But the romanticized version of what I thought it was, that's what I would have wanted to be.
I love it. What's funny is that I've been recently, I was like, let me go back and try For All Mankind, the TV show on Apple TV. And it's really cool because it's set in 1970s. And in the first episode, or it was the second episode, they put a man on the moon. Well, actually, they put a woman on the moon from Russia.
Really?
Yes.
Now,
so
this is a documentary, or this
is a show. This is a show on Apple TV Plus, and they're like, "What if?"
It's a what if show.
It's a what if show, right?
I'm pretty sure I would have heard about that if they had put a woman on the moon. Someone would have mentioned it.
This is a what if show. What if the Russians put a woman on the moon instead of we putting a man on the moon? And then now the U.S. government is trying to recruit all these women, and who was the pilot, and blah blah blah. It's really cool. I'm liking the drama and all that stuff goes in. So they put a lot of work into it, and I think it's in season 3 now. So that's pretty cool that you want it to be a romanticized version of an astronaut. You could be the Martian that Matt Damon played.
Like I said, now that I know a lot more about astronauting, I have
Like,
no
nah, that's
desire
okay.
to be. Yep, I will leave that to Matt Damon. I
Yes.
will instead, yeah, that's not my role model.
I love
Sorry.
it. All right. Next question. What is your favorite movie or TV show?
That's very, very hard because I tend not to have favorites. I tend to just, like I experience each thing in the moment. Either I like it or I
Mm-hmm.
don't. Um, Favorite movie. I'll tell you the movie that probably has made one of the biggest impacts on me, which is not necessary. I don't know that I could call it my favorite, but
Sure.
I still remember it. I saw it in childhood. It was a 1970s film called Resurrection.
Mm.
And it stars Ellen Burstyn as a woman from, I don't remember where, but somewhere in the deep South, someplace where um, someplace very religious. And she is in a car accident. And when she wakes up from the car accident, she discovers she has the power to heal.
Nice.
And she does not attribute it to God. She does not attribute it to magic. She basically says, I don't know where I got this power. I don't know what it means. All I know is that I can heal, and I'm going to use it to heal people who need to be healed. And her boyfriend is a very strict religious person who believes that her powers come from the devil. And this is the story. And this is not a, I mean, this is just kind of a drama. Like just take the whole thing as a given. This is not really science. There's no science fiction or fantasy aura at all. It's almost like a documentary kind of thing. And I'm not going to give it away on the off chance that somebody will actually watch it.
Go and watch the movie.
But I cried so much at the last scene.
Oh man!
That even just thinking about that scene right now, I start to tear up, and I'm kind of like, I don't know why it affected me that strongly, and I don't know if it would affect me that strongly if I watched it today, but it was just it was just beautiful. So anyway, Resurrection. I'll, awesome. I'll toss that out there, and it's subject to change without notice. In terms of TV series, there's a ton that I've really been liking. I really, really have loved Sex Education, which is a recent Netflix one. I'm currently watching The Americans, which I think is great. Like, it's convoluted, right? But part of what's so good about it is as long as you accept the implausibility of the sheer number of operations that these two hidden Russians are asked to do, like, they get into some really interesting scrapes, and you kind of see it. You kind of see like these parallels, and then how the Americans are operating and how the Russians are operating. I'm just finding it great fun.
Nice.
I would have to say, however, that my all-time favorite series has got to be Arrested Development.
No doubt that is
just the best writing, best comedy writing I've ever experienced.
Agreed.
Combined with just actors who just nailed the chemistry between them. They nailed it so much. If you watch the final season, not seasons 4 and 5 on Netflix, but the original third final season.
The third final season,
they write on so many levels at once. At one point, Portia LaRosse and David Cross are having a conversation. Portia LaCrosse is a real life lesbian who is playing a fairly sexual straight woman in the show. And David Cross is a real life straight man who is playing a closeted gay man in the show. And the two of them have this conversation like about people not actually being who they seem or something, or like, and the entire conversation makes sense if you think about the characters having it. It also makes sense if you think about the actors having it.
Right.
And it's like, it's also I wish I remembered exactly what the conversation was, but it's like meta commentary on the fact that it is a double meaning thing. And I'm like, who wrote that? What human being could pull all those layers together? Like at one point, Jason Bateman's who plays Michael, he has a love interest who's played by his real life sister. And there is a line when they almost kiss. There is a line where like, I think his line is, this is awkward on so many levels. And I'm just like, oh my God.
No,
Like, if you know that they're brother and sister, it gives you, it was like the line made sense in context. And
right, of course.
right.
And then
So
there
anyway,
too. Wow.
yeah,
I
Arrested
love it.
Development, just spectacular show.
Spectacular show. All right. This is going to be a quick one. I do
luck.
got to wrap it up. So
Famous last words. It's hard to shut me up. You need a mute button.
I know, right? Mute. All right. Next question. What movie would you choose if you got to play a character in it?
Oh, wow. That's a really good one. If I got to now, do I get to have the body of the person who actually
Whatever.
did play that? Okay.
I think so.
All right. In that case, it would be something with 25-year-old Zac Efron. And the whole
Okay.
reason that I'd be playing it is so that I could have that body. Six
I
packs,
love
man.
it.
That's where it's at.
Six-pack, that's where it's at. All right. Sweet. Your favorite superhero?
My favorite superhero, Green Lantern.
Love it. If you were a board game, what would it be?
All right, then. That one came out of
Probably.
left field.
Yes, sir.
It's board game. Can I be a card game?
I don't know.
Well, if I'm going to be a board game, I'm going to be Burgle Brothers by Tim
Burgle
Fowers.
Brothers.
Yeah,
Okay.
Burgle Brothers.
I like it.
I don't know why, but it's the only board game I can think of. I love his stuff. Buy his games. His games are great.
I love it. Sounds awesome. All right. Where can my superpreneurs find you?
You can find me at steverrobbins.com, STEVERROBBINS.com, or you can just go to meetstever.com, which is a domain I just registered because it's a lot shorter and I don't have to spell it. So meetstever.com.
I love it. Stever, thank you so much for your time and energy and wisdom and all the amazing hacks
He called me wise.
and the wiseman that you brought out. Thank you again. We will chat with you soon.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to coming back.
Awesome.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening to our guest on this episode. Please send me an email at junaid@hacksandhobbies.com to tell me what you loved about our guest today. You could find links mentioned in this episode on the hacksandhobbies.com website.